If you have seen My Little Pony or interacted with the community for a while, chances are you know about the infamous My Little Pony episode Boast, which has a surprising and interesting aura. Boast is known for being one of the worst My Little Pony Season 1 episodes, but is oddly also known for bringing the introduction of one of the fandom's most beloved characters in all generations of My Little Pony, which is of course Trixie. In this review, I will give my thoughts on the character of Trixie and how she's portrayed here, and her own episode as well. We will see how this episode sowed and sprouted the character of Trixie, with this episode representing her. So let us get into the episode and see how this episode became My Little Pony's first bad episode. We start with Twilight practicing magic spells with Spike to help tally her abilities. I've gotta say first that I do like how the episode uses its moments before the theme song and after it to show us how prominent magic will be in this episode, as well as the starting motif of Twilight's excellence with her catalog of spells. This gives us some ideas on what will come later on in the episode. This surprisingly gets off to an okay start, as many episodes don't really have anything special going on that contributes to the story before the theme song. We get to the start of the episode, which has Spike say lines that confused me at first. Like, what do you mean you thought that unicorns have a little magic that matches their special talents? The episode nuances this out with Twilight telling us that it goes for simple talents such as mathematics, but asks the question of what if a unicorn's special talent is magic? I'm actually really impressed. The episode properly establishes its genre really early on. We first got Twilight's spells in the beginning, and then we get this conversation. If you want to know a bit about me, I love, and I mean absolutely love, when episodes and shows have an established feel or genre. If you've seen my Over a Barrel review, you can definitely get what I mean. For example, the chanting in a different language and brittle gossip from Zecora to establish the theme and genre of racism in different cultures, stuff like that. So yeah, I really love the implementation of genres, and it's awesome how this episode doesn't fail to establish its own genre, which is about magic. After Spike tells Twilight how talented she is with magic, we get to Twilight selflessly saying that she believes there are other ponies as talented as her, which establishes her as a really kind and gracious pony. We then get the grand introduction to Snips and Snails. Although I don't mind these guys, I can definitely point fingers at who or what really made people dislike this episode so much. They lead Twilight and Spike to a magic show performed by, you guessed it, Trixie! We get introduced to the talent show with some undoubtedly cool visuals. After some boasting from Trixie as the episode promises, the rest of the main six present here start to have contempt against Trixie for boasting. When Spike begins to try to tell everyone how great Twilight is at magic, Twilight brings Spike to the back of the crowd in fear that she'll end up looking like a show-off, and even tells Spike about it. I really enjoy how nice this episode makes Twilight. Afterwards, Trixie claims to have vanquished an Ursa Major, and we get some more awesome scenery and nice sound effects from this episode. Like, no, seriously, how did the animators have the courage to animate the lights blinking here? This stuff takes actual heart. Then Trixie calls for ponies to compete against her, which Applejack accepts gladly, which leaves her tied with an apple on her mouth. Then we get Rainbow Dash compete with some even more awesome imagery. Like, seriously, this is setting up to be one of MLP's most scenic episodes. She ends up becoming a twister. Then Rarity uses the curtains and turns them into dresses, and Trixie gives her green hair. To talk about Trixie, I've got to take a moment to say that I actually really like Trixie as a villain. She looks like she represents people who are really prideful and arrogant, and I honestly find that really cool about her. She shows this personality trait through her catchphrases and even actions, as we can see later. Now back to this. Did you guys catch what was wrong with this scene? Well, basically, the main six, our protagonists, are honestly seeming a lot worse than Trixie. What you need to know first is that Trixie is a show pony, so showing off is literally her job, and the pony's just trying to show off to Trixie instead of just talking to her about her mean bragging really makes them look as immature as Trixie or even worse. This scene overall makes the main six look hypocritical, doing the exact same thing as Trixie is doing. The episode also doesn't tell us what's bad about boasting. Like, yeah, I do agree that boasting can be bad, but this episode does not properly tell us why. Here's a good idea. Firstly, actually showcase Trixie being mean to people. This would make Trixie look worse than his antagonist, and it will also make the message implied better. Make her actually boast negatively, and make herself look really unlikable so that it shows how boasting and pride can ruin your own character. This would also make the contempt from the main six toward Trixie actually make sense, as Trixie would actually be a mean pony deserving of being called out on it. The episode then gets to an uninteresting route. We continually get Spike constantly asking Twilight to help, and the cycle just continues. Spike asks Twilight to show Trixie she's not that great, and Twilight says no. Spike asks Twilight again and says no. That is just lazy writing, as there is nothing being built upon with this idea. The closest thing we get is Spike giving reasons why it isn't bad for her to do it. An idea for a change in this motif is for Twilight to actually try to do a magic trick in front of Trixie herself, but end up doing it wrong out of fear. This would give some exposition to the final act of the episode. Going back to the episode, when Trixie confronts Twilight wanting to challenge her, Twilight makes up an excuse to go and runs home. We get to a scene with Trixie in her inner life, which is kind of pointless, but I do kind of enjoy it anyway, as we actually get our new antagonist fleshed out, and we get to know more about her personality. She is definitely smug and condescending. Spike comes along with Snips and Snells and talks about how much he doesn't like Trixie, and how much he thinks Twilight is better. Since Spike doesn't want to believe that Trixie vanquished an Ursa Major, this leads to Snips and Snells getting the idea to wake up an Ursa Major so Trixie can vanquish it. We get to a scene with Spike continuing to urge Twilight to show her magic to Trixie, and I do think Twilight is in the right here for not wanting to show her magic to Trixie, because that would actually really make her look like a show-off. The only viable reason for her to do this is if she needed to use it to save Ponyville. Here's an idea to somewhat break the repetitiveness. Have Spike actually see that Twilight randomly standing up to Trixie would come off as her showing off, and instead advise her to talk to Trixie. This is a lot better than what we got with Spike's advice going nowhere, and would present a morally good motivation for our characters. We then see Snips and Snells going to the Everfree Forest Cave to wake up an Ursa Major. If you thought this scene was unrealistic, as you question how they were able to know where the Ursa is, remember that Trixie said herself that it was located in a cave deep in the Everfree Forest. Speaking of that, how do ponies know where the Ursa is located? When the Ursa Major wakes up and rampages across Ponyville, it destroys Trixie's sleeping hut, and Trixie is forced to confront the blue bear with the magic she used to vanquish it, which turns out to fail. The bear screeches and wakes up the whole town. Trixie then admits that she really never made an Ursa Major disappear, and she made the story up to make herself look better. I'd say this reveal didn't really feel deserved, and it was already something we could have guessed would have happened. This reveal would have had more of an impact if Trixie was actually, mean, but she just barely insults the main six, and in return, it looks better than the good ponies as they tried to show up to her, making them look like show-offs. If Trixie were mean, her admitting it would feel more like it matters, as it shows she has improved in some way as a pony. Twilight then uses her magic to give milk to the Ursa Major to put him to sleep. The choice for Twilight to actually be in a situation where she can use her magic without being a show-off is great. It is also an excellent payoff to the build-up of the entire episode, as we were curious to see what Twilight is really capable of. This also brings about the defeat of Trixie. Twilight's friends then praise Twilight for putting the Ursa back in its cave and putting it to sleep, and tell her that they wouldn't hate her for showing her talents. And I think that this whole situation is just very off-putting. As we saw earlier, we pointed out that Twilight's friends were starting to look like actual show-offs themselves, which made them look very hypocritical and boastful, looking worse than the actual antagonists of the episode. While here, these exact ponies are just what Twilight is hoping will approve of her showing her talents, which just makes this whole situation feel like Twilight is getting approval from the wrong ponies. Like if the main six in this episode were as nice or almost as nice as Twilight was in this episode, then this reveal of her friends not hating her would actually be meaningful. But as these ponies are hypocrites and it wouldn't really matter what they think, this is all just not meaningful at all. This being the emotional climax of the episode just doesn't do it for me. Other episodes like Call of the Cutie have a better emotional climax, as in the end, Apple Bloom not only gets a satisfying solution to a journey she faces, but even gets a new friend group. We then get the plot twist that the Ursa Major is actually an Ursa Minor. The punishment Snips and Snells get for bringing the Ursa to town is to clean up the remains of Trixie's hut, and mustaches for some reason. Trixie then goes off with a boastful send-off, saying how Twilight will never have the same magical ability as her. We then get the moral that it is okay to show off your abilities and talents when it is appropriate to do so. I've heard people say this moral was very specific and would be hard to relate to, but I think it's a good one, as it could appeal to individuals who happen to relate to this situation. And I can imagine everyone has a phase of their life where they can relate to Twilight's situation here. We also get this nice bit with how Rarity didn't really go for Spike's mustache, and Twilight telling him how the mustache has nothing to do with his personality and that he should be himself. Spike then tells her that he thinks it will work out if he has a mustache and a beard. Overall, this episode was kind of a dud. Although I liked its visual and auditory direction, the episode suffers from a repetitive plot and lots of choices for the writing of this episode that contradict its own theme. However, I've got to say this episode is definitely interesting, and I think the plot of this episode really had a lot of potential to it. With all of this, I give this episode a 6, and a 6 may seem a bit too generous for an episode I consider to be My Little Pony's first worst, but I honestly do think this episode had its fair share of redeeming qualities. The episode had decent exposition and built up to a dramatic resolution, where we were able to see Twilight's magical abilities, which I have to say is very radical, and by radical I mean cool. I am a dedicated fan of Mr. Enter, and I have seen his review on Boastbusters probably like more than 4 times. And I've got to say, I partially disagree with his consensus of being bored by this, because I've got to admit this episode is really thrilling. No joke. Not to mention the amount of visual awesomeness this episode brings. Trixie was also a really captivating character, and this episode is really good at giving Trixie her own memorable moments, such as her failing to vanquish the Ursa Major. In the end, Boastbusters definitely is an interesting and captivating episode to talk about after almost 2 decades of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, and I honestly myself at times come back to this episode despite its flaws. That's going to be it for this review. Make sure to give a like and subscribe if you are interested in what I will post next, or if you just like this video. Here's a video on my thoughts on the upcoming generation of My Little Pony with my predictions and hopes. And yeah, see you everyone.